Hi, everyone. Welcome to News and Brews Sports Biz, where we tap into the latest in college athletics and advocate for the financial voices in the industry. I'm Katie Davis.
And I'm Ken Kurdziel. After a short break, we're back. We're going to cover the top 5 hot topics shaping collegiate athletics so far in 2026. Not surprisingly, they are all very interconnected, largely stemming from revenue share in the House settlement. And then, Katie, you and I were talking last week getting ready for this, and then sure enough, the White House executive order came out on Friday, so added one more item to our list of top topics. So let's, without further ado, let's kick it off with that one. What are your first thoughts as you read that Friday night?
My first thoughts were that I don't know what it's going to do or accomplish. I mean, I do like, that it aims to, what do they say, restore order or fairness or whatever. And of course, I like that they're really focusing on preserving the traditional model with women's and Olympic sports. It all sounds great. Really, I think my first true thought was, is it really worth the paper that it's written on? Our attorneys are just out there saying cha-ching, which is true. Like, they all went to Twitter right away and started talking about billable hours and thanking Trump for that, basically saying like it's not going to hold up in court and they're going to continue suing. So honestly, I think what frustrated me probably the most about the whole thing was this roundtable that, the president set up. And yes, I know the conference commissioners and a lot of people are behind this and support this. And I'm not against it at all. But I feel like they didn't have enough, of course, financial voices at the table, which I talk about all the time. And so there were a lot of things that maybe weren't considered. And I feel like this executive order sidesteps like the economics of the system and doesn't really solve the issue there, which is, cost containment, and you can't really cut costs anymore. So how are we going to address, coaching salaries and buyouts and staffing bloat and the, more and more and more ask, even with student athletes. I mean, I do think the portal limitations might help that a little bit because it won't be so competitive, but it doesn't really address anything that's going to financially fix what's sort of been broken prior to the House settlement in college athletics. I also think, maybe they should have put a little bit more guidance and how rev share should be structured. And maybe they didn't want to step on the toes of the House plaintiffs and the settlement process, but kind of felt like maybe there needed to be a little bit more guidance there, as well as accountability of the governing bodies. So the CSC, maybe even the NCAA and the conferences a little bit as far as just, what are they doing? Are they adding value, or is like enforcement or approving or not approving deals like really the best thing they should be doing? Or are there proactive value add things they could be doing instead? So that was kind of a lot of my initial thoughts, and really even just a bigger thing of yes, some of the people are working college athletics every day or are sports adjacent, but I think a lot of people right now in general are just excited to get involved in college sports any way they can, and when they have no real context to contribute to trying to solve the problem.
Yeah, no, I think that sums up kind of what I was thinking as well. And I know the first thing that hit my head when I read it was like, oh boy, the attorneys are going to be excited about this, because there were certain things that was asking the NCAA to create rules around the transfers. Exactly. I was like, well, that's already been litigated. They've already lost. And it kind of forgets the fact that the NCAA would like to put a lot of these things in place. They've tried to put a lot of these things in place, and it's led to litigation. And, there's nothing in the executive order that's going to change that litigation. And the NCAA being a kind of a punching bag for that, quite frankly. So really, unless it gets taken further into like real legislation that, antitrust settlements, things of that nature, I just don't see what it really effectively does. I mean, there's a lot of great concepts. I mean, a lot of things that we'd all be excited about, the protection of women's sports and Olympic sports, and a little bit of sanity to the eligibility windows and all of that. But it's going to be tough for it to see it actually make meaningful change. Yeah.
I agree. And that is kind of a good segue into hot topic 2, which is the recent white paper that was released by University of Louisville, both not only from Josh Hurd, but also their president and board chair. And, it's what we've all been thinking. We all said it, amen, I'm sure, when we read it. But it's just that, actual like speaking out and saying that the current model, especially the financial model in college athletics, is just unsustainable. And I hear that word a lot, of unsustainable. You all have been saying it for a while now, but they've done a good job of putting some specifics around the claim. And I think what stands out is it's not just that there's a problem, but how plainly it's being illustrated in a way that's hard to ignore or put a spin on. I think a few of the things that, spoke to me was just, the short-term competitiveness versus more long-term sustainability. And, yes, there's all the other things being discussed about, cost discipline and, subsidies and equity across programs and things like that. But, I think it's going to be really hard to come up with a set of practical takeaways from it, though, and which is harder than it should be. But I think right now, athletics has just gotten to where it's so messed up and is moving so fast that it's hard to kind of take that step back and eliminate some of the noise that's going on around and figuring out, what is the right long-term answer. I certainly don't know what the solution is. And, but I mean, you've already done financial modeling, you've already cut costs, you've already explored new revenue streams, you've gone back to campus leadership to make a case for more support. And, looking at something like this, things still don't add up. And there's, I think, a bigger question is, is this actually a problem we can solve, or are we just better at managing the chaos? So it's definitely one of those areas of like, everyone's rushing in to try to save college sports, as I just mentioned, and with the White House executive order, I think honestly everyone wants their 15 minutes of fame by putting their touch or flavor on college sports, but it's really just putting an expensive and distracting Band-Aid on a much bigger problem.
Yeah, no, and managing the chaos, I think that expresses it well, because as we spend time with our clients, talking to people in the industry, it's pretty clear that it's honestly just trying to keep your head above water, managing on a day-to-day basis, realizing that, in this era right now, there's almost no rules, or any of the old rules are being torn apart, and new models, new ideas, new initiatives are starting to take shape. To try to just capture where athletics might be 4 or 5 years down the road, as opposed to even just right now. And that kind of leads to kind of one of the next items that we had on here was just this the increasing nature of new entities being created in the college athletic space, the number of schools that are talking about NewCos and new ventures, LLCs, whatever they might be. I know that you spend pretty much every day, talking to a new school that's called up to talk about, hey, we want to talk about structuring a NewCo. So maybe a little bit more about kind of what those conversations are looking like right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now I am talking about it literally every day. Not with a different school every day, because obviously we run out of schools pretty fast, but it is something that I am talking about every day. And it's essentially the idea of creating a new commercial entity to house and manage like all or a portion of your college athletics department. And, the major headlines and what I hear a lot of is like the Kentucky LLC, or we see, Utah's the first to announce they're going private equity. And so they have to create a new entity to be able to do that. And, the headlines are that they're pioneers in this area. And don't get me wrong, Utah breaking that stigma of private equity is definitely pioneering. But what hasn't been discussed is that these entities have existed for a long time in many cases. And, I think the Kentucky LLC model isn't that different from what already exists. It just adds 3 letters to LLC to the end of it. But I mean, if you see like the athletic association model that's, in various schools in Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Louisville that I mentioned is an athletic association. And then you also have the model with like booster clubs and athletic foundations. And then even more recently, models like Clemson Ventures, where it has existed. It will continue to exist. I think why it's gaining traction right now is, just how everything's changing. And it's kind of, college athletics operates in this hive mind FOMO. And so I think right now it's one of those things that's front of mind. And honestly, it's not a bad idea. I think if you're evaluating it, though, you should focus less on just doing it and more on execution and like the why. So like what problem are you trying to solve? What does success look like? Do we have the infrastructure to support it? Where does the risk land if something goes wrong? I mean, I think we need to think through some of those things. I also don't know that it's the answer to sustainability, but I don't think there is an answer to that right now. And this is certainly a more sophisticated workaround until we get there. But I mean, there's a lot to think about when you're starting a new entity, like a lot. And I'm coming at it from, financial infrastructure, overall business risk, tax risk, also just thinking about, things like even compliance for, NCAA or Title IX or, CSC compliance. So, there's a lot of things to be thinking about. And, generally, most people just think about, okay, well, it's a workaround to red tape and friction that comes with, frustrations with governance and hoops you have to jump through, or slow processes like procurement, or, wanting to shield things from public record. And all of those are really good reasons why, the NewCo model is advantageous. But those shouldn't be the only reasons why you're doing it. And I think there are a lot of other risks out there around tax complexity, governance limitations, operational strain, things like that should also be considered and sort of defined as you're coming up with what this new model looks like. But it is something that I think many, many, many schools in the Power Four are going to be doing, maybe even some that aspire to be in that next round of realignment, whatever that looks like. And so I do think that's going to continue to be a movement that universities go after.
No, I agree. And that's well said. You're not going to automatically make more money under a NewCo structure. That's not it's not an answer to all of your financial problems. However, from what we're seeing, the most of the schools going after it, looking at the initiatives, friction was a good word you used. I mean, really like trying to reduce the friction that can sometimes exist in existing higher education institutions. We know, from what we've seen, higher education is not always the most cutting edge with how quickly they are able to move and how nimble they are and so forth. So I do see that as a potential big advantage, and, certainly needing to use that to help really drive revenue up higher. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to be a sustainability fix unless, again, there's something that you're getting out of this, something that you're able to do that you weren't able to do under your old structure. So really being able to answer the why behind that, though, going in is really smart and a good thing. One completely other different area, I mean, still all related to all of these, but something that seems like we're seeing a lot more conversations on and talk about complexity, really complex in this area, is the issue of international student athletes and their taxes. What are some of the phone calls that you're getting? What are some of the conversations that you're having in this area? Because it seems like, again, another one where it's just kind of coming up very regularly, a lot of conversations in this space.
There is, and it's funny because since NIL, was it 2021, when NIL became a thing, we talked a lot about taxes and, in general, athletes are going to have to navigate taxes. But pretty quickly, once we realized what NIL was actually going to be, it said, well, now they're big boys and girls and they can figure out taxes just like every other American who earns money. And so I am all about educating student athletes and helping universities prepare and protect their athletes for taxes. Definitely don't want them making a negative headline that looks bad on the university. But just kind of disregarded, it honestly thought it would be kind of a nightmare to work in that space of helping athletes with their taxes.
Yes.
However, I think once after July 1 and rev share hit, saw that there is really more of a need for support for international athletes, probably in three different ways. Like, one is really more supporting the university side of, understanding responsibilities as the withholding agent. And in some ways it's not new because you've been doing this for scholarships, but the income that is being characterized for rev share, it could be different in those treaties with those different countries. For example, royalties could be different than scholarships. And so making sure you understand your, the requirements for withholding. Are there any advantages to researching the treaties that can reduce the amount of withholding so it puts more money in the athlete's pocket? So that's one piece. But then the other piece was like, putting on my mom hat as I'm having conversations with these student athletes while I'm doing education sessions. And inevitably, it's the student athletes that stay back and ask the questions are the international ones, probably 9 times out of 10. And I start to really feel for them. And honestly, like, pre-July 1 was definitely Wild West. I probably wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, and I would certainly advise you all not to do that either, just because I saw a lot of weird stuff happening. From what I'm hearing of, collectives, sort of making payments, not making withholdings, not doing filings, sending money to foreign bank accounts or to foreign entities to then pay the athlete, or sending the athletes to the Bahamas for the weekend and then getting them paid there. I mean, there's a lot of things that are probably not being reported at all. So that's going to become really eye-opening that once it's now being done on the up and up, that it's going to start, having a lot more compliance things that they're having to deal with. And I'm just thinking, if I sent my kid to another country, it's already intimidating. And then you add the other country's tax requirements onto that. And it's so complicated, so much more complicated than what we're used to. And I just think that worries me. And so I've seen schools start to, find ways to support their athletes, really in 2 different areas, aside from education. One is helping with the ITIN certifications, which ITINs are, their international tax ID number, basically. And it's the equivalent of a social security number, and athletes need that number when they file their return if they want to get their withholdings refunded, if they're eligible for a refund. But even more so now that they have money, they also need that number to buy a car and do things like that. And so we're hearing a lot of requests for those ITIN certifications. But what's complicated is that you can't just fill out a form and get certified. You have to sit in person in front of a certified acceptance agent that is, someone that's gone through training and been vetted by the IRS, to make sure that everything is legit. Like, you're literally looking at their passport and their visa and getting blue ink signatures. And it's a lot, having interview questions for them. Like, there's a lot that goes on as part of that. And so it's hard sometimes to find a certified acceptance agent. We have some in our firm, and honestly, I'm thinking about becoming one just to help my clients if I'm already going to be on campus. Yep. But I think, that's something that is, really important and starting to be asked for more frequently. So I would say, however they've been doing it in the past with scholarships, if that worked, I would keep doing it. But if you need to move faster, or if your university doesn't want to touch it with your rev share athletes, like, you might need to start seeking out assistance in that area if you want to support your athletes with that. It's possible you have a local IRS office that could be helpful as well. But I will say, And some athletes that we talked to that even went through that process of trying to do it, they went to their local IRS office and then it got rejected because they didn't know what they were doing. So it can become quite the nightmare and not good for that athlete's experience. So that's just getting the ITIN. Then it's actually filing your taxes, which is also more complicated than the typical tax return. And so, we can certainly help in that area too, if that's something of interest and it's something we've started doing. But, I think, for your scholarship athletes, keep doing what they've been doing. It's not that difficult. Where it can get touchy though, and I know a lot of universities have been talking to me about, they've always helped their international athletes navigate various things and you are continuing to, but now it's starting to feel more risky for you and more gray. And it's certainly, even for us, it's kind of a risky gray area. And we put, in our contracts of, we're not responsible for immigration and, and that kind of thing. So I mean, but what's really, some of that Wild West before the collective, but then you've also got, you add the portal to that mix and are you going to be responsible for helping your athletes figure out the rev share and NIL that they got before they came to you? Or after they leave you, are you still responsible for helping to make sure they get all the forms that they need if they applied for their ITIN, but haven't been accepted until after they've moved? Are they going to come back calling you asking about it, or offering tax support even after they leave? I mean, I think there's a lot of things like that you need to think about if you want to take that on. And I do think, as a mom, I think I would love for my kids' university to take that on if I sent them to another country. And so, that's something that I think is great if you're willing to do it, and can be a very worthwhile service that you're offering to those athletes. But it is very complicated. There's a lot of steps involved. And I think it's only going to continue to become more complicated as NIL, above the cap NIL evolves, and as, rev share starts to get looked at. It's all in general been untested by the IRS. And what are they going to look at, once they start figuring this out? And then is, immigration going to start looking at it? Who knows? It's a giant question mark and probably a big risk, but to be determined. But it's something that we've talked about before. We have a lot of articles out there on things you need to be thinking about. So definitely take a look at that.
Yeah. The analogy to the mom hat that you talk about there, because I think about these international student athletes, and it's a complicated enough time right now to be an international student athlete or an international student in general with all that's been going on. And then you add on to that the complexities of taxes. And, it's one thing it's complicated for domestic student athletes also, that are facing certain things for the first time, but at least there's oftentimes a parent or other trusted adults they can go to and that's going to have some basic understanding of U.S. taxes and so forth to be able to communicate to them. So you add on the fact that the international tax treatment is so much more complicated. And then number two, that, they could call their parents, but their parents aren't going to likely know anything on that. So it is an area where I think you're right. I think somebody needs to be able to put on the mom hat and kind of take care of some of these kids. So
yeah, which you all do already. Yeah. I've just now seen it from a different lens of interacting with them, and just know I would be incredibly worried and would worry about my kid, whether they were out of the country or not. But at least in the country, I know I could help them, or H&R Block or TurboTax or the accounting student on campus. And so it's really hard to do that when, they're farther away in a literal foreign land. So just something to continue to think about and keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And so hot topic number 5, again, everything points back to revenue share and the House settlement. So with that, there are increased stakes now really on NCAA reports. And we're seeing lots of different signs of that. We knew that coming out of the settlement. What can you tell me about some of the increased stakes that we see associated with this NCAA reporting cycle?
Well, I mean, I don't think this is, I think everyone knows, right? But, what went from, the MFRS being used for benchmarking and trend analysis and internal decision making and research is now used to calculate the rev share cap. Some of those revenue categories are going into that. So, we kind of knew that there would be this shift of, of something that was just a value add tool to something that's now used for enforcement and legal scrutiny. What we don't yet know, but are starting to maybe see some movement is, how are the House plaintiffs going to use it? Who is overseeing this? Some questions I've been getting is the NCAA overseeing this? Is the CSC overseeing this? Is it, or is it just the House plaintiffs? It's not clear. But, one thing to remember is in the House case, the NCAA and Power 5 conferences were the defendants, not the individual schools. So it'll be interesting to see how they interact with, I'm assuming, the NCAA and conference offices to gather whatever information they need. If they're going to do audits, we don't know. I have heard they've started requesting some information about other operating revenue to make sure it shouldn't have been put, in one of the other revenue buckets that would be used to calculate the cap. And also evaluating, are they reporting revenues gross or net of some expense? And so, I think, going back to the NewCo movement, I think that's going to raise a lot of questions about how things get reported in the future, because I don't think you can just exclude revenues. Obviously, there's already rules in the NCAA bylaws about including the affiliated entities, but I don't think it's apples for apples though. An example is if you decide to create a new company and then bring MMR in house, are you picking up gross revenue and gross expense, where in the past your MMR partner was sending you the net revenue and incurring the expenses themselves and taking a cut of it. And so your revenue was just your cut and there weren't expenses. And so, when you're thinking about the calculation of rev share cap, which again, this could change by the time we figure out this NewCo model and how to report it, they could totally change how you calculate the cap. But for right now, what is the right amount? And I think that's what they're currently asking questions about. And of course, like everything, nothing's exactly the same from university to university. So there's going to be different ways to treat it. But, I think that's one big piece is how are they going to be looking at revenue? And then I think the other piece is going to be how rev share expense is going to be reported. And I know there are some national advocates out there that are seeking for it to be broken out by sport or gender. The current NCAA reporting rules, at least for 2025, the 26 rules haven't come out yet, but for 25, don't require it to be broken out by sport. And, there's no guidance out yet for that or the EADA, but there's also nothing in the, EADA, from what I can tell, that's going to make you call it out separately, because there's sort of separate call outs or salaries and, financial aid and recruiting and game operations. And so I don't know how rev share fits into any of those categories. So I think it would just fit in the other expenses. But it's just one other area that's a source of confusion. And, I'm also hearing that there's confusion by lawmakers out there that are think that the definition of revenue share means you're sharing actual generated revenue from their sport at the percentage that
right.
That's applied to it, and so I think there's just some education out there that it's not necessarily payments directly tied to sport revenue or profitability or a defined pool of revenue. And you can certainly have athletes receive revenue in sports that don't generate any revenue or that certainly don't generate a profit. And I don't think that that's seen or understood by some of these people that are sitting at these roundtables making decisions.
Absolutely. Well, that's 5 items. I feel like it could have been 10 easily. There's a lot here. Again, so interconnected. It's been a crazy start to 2026. we're going to see where the year takes us. I can't wait for us to do a top 5 at the end of the year and kind of look back to what we were talking about at this point in time and, just see how it might differs. But I know there's going to be exciting things out there.
That's terrifying. They have to be like, oh my God, if we talk about this in January or, December, January, like who the heck knows?
Yeah, no, that's the way the industry feels right now, is who the heck knows what's coming next. And let's just all do our best to manage and survive it. So, well, it wouldn't be a News and Brews if we didn't talk about the beer or the beverage or whatever your choice is on that front. What have you been enjoying lately on that topic?
Well, I was recently on campus at Illinois and had went out for some drinks one evening and had the ILL IPA by Distilled Brewery. But I think I've maybe even talked about it before. I really love the breweries that do university affiliated beers, but shocker, it's an IPA, and it's very good.
Well, a lot to pick from. There's been a lot of travel here in the starting part of 2026, so it was a little bit hard to narrow down to one, and I was working really hard also to try to pick something just other than an IPA. So I'm going to go with a beer that I enjoyed very much when I was up in Charlottesville, Virginia for some work here recently. We went to Salvage Brewing there and had a beer called Corduroy, which was a German Bock, B-O-C-K. Really, really enjoyed it. It was super cold out at that time. It was right after the big storm had come through, left a ton of snow. And that was just an excellent, warm, dark beer to enjoy on a good night up in Charlottesville.
Well, great. Well, I hope you all are enjoying a brew as well, because there's a lot to, to commiserate over. I'm sure nothing that we said was news to you, but hopefully you at least feel seen and heard, and it can be a listening therapy of sorts for you. But want to thank you all for tuning in, and we will continue to share more things as they progress, so stay tuned. And in the meantime, cheers.
Cheers.
To learn more about the James Moore & Company Collegiate Athletics and Higher Education segments, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to sign up for Insights to get our latest industry updates, news, and events delivered straight to your inbox. You can also follow us on Twitter at JMCO Higher Ed and on LinkedIn for the latest news as the landscape of collegiate athletics and higher education is continually evolving.